All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff with Fluent American checking in. We're going to be writing a task one academic chart. I've posted it in the chat box where you can actually see the document. I was just going to post a quick reminder on our Facebook page in case anyone wants to check in. All right, so we're going to be looking at task one line graphs. Let's look and see what we're going to be dealing with. I'll also put this to the side so that way if anyone has any questions or things in the chat box, you guys can let me know. But yeah, so we're going to be looking at, like I said, a line graph. Basically, we're looking at number of homes from 2010 to 2020. Okay. And yeah, this is a fairly standard one, something that you can expect to see. Typically, when you get a line graph, there's going to be, if there's more than two, typically what's going to happen is two of them will have, or most of them will have about the same trend, and then one of them is going to do something crazy and very different, and that's kind of what we see here as well. So we see that for flats, that's our solid black line. It's going to be doing something that all the other ones are not doing, and that is going to go continuously up. So that's kind of actually the first step, when you have a task one, is kind of just take a moment to look and see what the chart's giving you, see what the information is, because you need to be thinking about your overview. That's normally how I would suggest starting a task one. You don't really need to start off with just rephrasing the question. I mean, I know a lot of teachers and things say that, but that's really not necessary, and you can run into some risks if you do that. I would suggest starting with your overview. Okay. Quick way. So for instance, overall, flats were the only category to experience continuous growth. What else do we see? Well, we can see that, let's see, detached homes were about 2,200. They finished with 2,200, so they even out. Meanwhile, semi-detached homes decrease, and our last category, our terraced homes, also decreased. So while detached homes finished with numbers that were equivalent to 2010, and semi-detached houses had a small decline. Terraced homes had the worst performance, or maybe not the worst performance, had the most dramatic drop in. Actually, we just finished with drop. I don't want to repeat numbers. Notice I said numbers earlier, so I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again. So that's why I'm just going to say numbers for the first one and not say anything here. Okay, so again, so this is just a quick overview for the chart. 2 sentences is fine. I wouldn't suggest doing much beyond that. You don't need to give super specific information. You're just trying to identify trends. That's your job, just identifying trends. From there, you can go on to your actual paragraphs to explain in more specific detail. Okay. What I would suggest when you're doing that is, before you actually start writing your actual paragraphs, kind of decide how you want to organize things. So typically in a chart, you can group things together based on maybe groups that rose versus groups that fell versus groups that stayed the same. Okay, so that's one option. You can group things according to your axes. So for instance, you could make body paragraphs based around years. So maybe like one body paragraph for 2010, 2012, another body paragraph for 2014, 2016, and then another body paragraph for 2018, 2020. So you could do that. Another way you could do body paragraphs is grouping by your y-axis. So for instance, 2800 to 2400, 2200 to 1800, and so on. So that's kind of your first step before you actually start writing your paragraphs. Decide how you want to organize them. Also, you could do it by categories, and I think for me that's probably the path I'm going to choose. So I'm going to give each one of these topics a specific body paragraph so I can just describe it in more detail. Okay, so let's start off with those. I can just work from left to right. We can start off with detached homes. Okay. So for instance, detached homes were an anomaly when compared to the other categories. No other group ended with higher numbers than where it started. Okay, so again, no other groups finished with higher numbers. They started with 2010, they finished with 2800. I mean, they start with 1,000 and ended with 2800. They nearly tripled their numbers, or maybe they nearly tripled their initial numbers from 2010 finishing with 2,800 units. Okay. So when we say nearly tripled and then we say the final number 2,800, so then your reader can imply that, oh, then it must have started off around 1,000. Okay, so in this way, by saying they nearly tripled, you're doing a lot of work. You're making it so that you don't need to say that in 2010 they had 1,000, in 2020 they had 2,800. Okay, so but just by saying tripled, you're saving some of that work for yourself. Okay. So like, I would maybe just add a little note between 2014 to 2018 because that seems to be the most dramatic point for this information. So from 2014 to 2018, like a time where many other where the other groups faltered, they still managed to grow from 2002, where did they end up, to 2,400. I may even add a little adverb here. So even from 2014 to 2018, time where the other groups faltered, they still managed to grow from 2,000 to 2,400. Homes. Okay, so I think that would be fine for your detached homes category. Next up, I'm just going to go left to right, so that way your examiner can kind of see your organization. They can say, oh, you're just going from, again, left to right in terms of categories. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so next we have semi-detached homes. Began with a plunge from 2,000 houses in 2010 to I'm just going to go down to the fall in 2018. To a low of, how many houses is this? Well, about 1,500, right? So a low of 1,500 in 2018. Also, let's check our spelling. So semi-detached. Okay. So they just kind of had a continuous decrease with a little bit of a plateau, but I think you'll be okay just by saying 2010 to 2018 it was a decrease, especially because it didn't really grow during that one period. Okay. It's like maybe they were able to recover some of their original numbers. However, okay, I'm a staunch supporter of paragraphs that are at least 3 sentences. Okay, paragraph ideally has 3 to 5 sentences at least. So where possible, I try to make paragraphs of about that length, including in task 1s. So I'm just going to use this as kind of a transition sentence, and then finish. It's like over the last 2 years of the period. Over the last 2 years of the period, they grew by, so let's see, so they have 1,500 here, and then they finish with 1,800. They grew by 300 homes. Okay, and again, this is another way, kind of what we said before, so that we're not always saying like, oh, they had 1,600 here, they had 2,000 here, they had 3,000 here. That gets a little bit repetitive with your structure for numbers, so then you can do a little bit of work. You say, okay, well, if in 2018 they had 1,500, and then in 2020 they had 1,800, we'll just say that they had 300 more. Okay, so you can do little things like that, so that way your writing is not so repetitive and mechanical. Okay, so that's going to help your vocab score a bit. So we got through 2 of our categories. Last 2, terraced homes and flats. Terraced homes. Or like, it's like statistically, terraced homes fared the worst. So their initial figures stood at 1,600. So their initial figures stood at 1,600 in 2010, which also happened to be their peak. Other than a slight plateau. So let's kind of focus on that 2012, 2014 area, okay? From 2012 to 2014, numbers stayed flat at 1,400. So other than a slight plateau where numbers stayed flat at 1,400, experienced a continuous decline. Continuous, or maybe a steady decline, because it seems to be about the same rate throughout. Okay. Finishing with 1,000 homes. Okay, so we've gotten 3, so now we just need to do one more. Ooh, look at me. This is why it's always good to check. This category that I wrote here is not quite right. We're just talking about flats. Okay. So let's adjust this. Flats were an anomaly. And now we can talk about detached homes. Okay, my mistake. Glad we caught that. Okay. If you do make a mistake like that on the test, what can you expect? Well, it's probably going to lower your task achievement score. It's going to make it so that you can't get higher than a 5 for your task achievement because you're not fully answering the prompt, or you're not giving correct information. You're giving false information. That's not true. So always double check to make sure your paragraphs talk about what you want them to talk about. Okay, so I needed to adjust the flats category because I used the wrong term. Okay, so always double check. Glad I caught that. So detached homes. Okay. The only other category. In fact, you know what? Since they have some similarities, at least initially, with flats, so I'm going to actually move this paragraph closer to it. Okay, so I'm going to move it up here. So detached homes. The only other section that grew from 2010 to 2014. Starting with 2200 and ending that period with 2800. Okay, from 2014 to 2018, their figures fluctuated. To a peak, or falling as low as about 2,500, falling as low as 2,500, briefly rising back to 2,700 at the end of that period. By 2020, all gains were erased as detached. That's the amount of detached homes fell back to the same numbers from a decade earlier. Okay, so we mentioned that in 2010 they had 2,200 units, and then in 2020 they also have 2,200 units. So we're falling back into the same categories. Okay, so we have all of our groups. I'm just going to make this chart a little bit smaller. Actually, I'll leave it. So you can see that we have all of our categories here. This one's a little bit long just because all of these groups are relatively different, so it's kind of hard to pair them together. I did add some extra details and things. If you feel like you are pressed for time, if you're like, oh my gosh, Geoff, I don't know if I can write this many words in only 20 minutes, some places where you could potentially cut. So for instance, I'll just announce some places. For the detached homes category, you could, in theory, just kind of group it into two. So from 2010 to 2014, and then 2014 to 2020. Okay, so I added that little bit from 2014 to 2018, but if you feel like you don't have time for that, you could just do 2014 to 2020, and I think you'd still be fine. For flats, honestly, you could just do one quick sentence and just kind of say that the numbers grew continuously. It might be good to at least have two sentences, but if you're really pressed for time, you're not sure you can fit 150 words or as many words as you need to explain everything, you could describe flats in one sentence and capture it okay. For detached homes, we already talked about that. Semi-detached homes, semi-detached were our dots. You could really just do 2010 to 2018, then 2018 to 2020. Okay, and I think you'd be fine with that, just for two. Then our last one, terraced homes. I mean, honestly, terraced homes, you could kind of just do like flats. If you're pressed for time, you could probably do terraced homes in about one sentence. Just say like, hey, it just kept dropping with a slight flat period. Okay, so you could do that in one sentence. Okay, again, I'm a strong supporter of paragraphs that are about 3 sentences, but I know in task 1 you're pressed for time, so you do what you need to do to get all the information said. Okay, this is just an example of what it could look like if all of your paragraphs had at least 3 sentences. All right, if you have other questions about this, comments about this, feel free to leave them, and I'll be happy to respond. Also, be sure to check out our other videos on IELTS in our playlist tab, and also feel free to join our IELTS writing group, okay, where you can also maybe post your own answers to this prompt, and I'd be happy to take a quick look at them to provide some feedback. And again, I'll post that in the comments as well. All right, thank you guys so much for your time. I will see you later. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for your time. Take care.